Enjoys his work as a broadcaster, best known for his commentary and technical insight into world-class single-seater endurance competitions. Please welcome our keynote for today, ladies and gentlemen, Alex Brundle.
And I own a 65 Mini as well, so to add to the exploits. Good morning, everybody. What a pleasure to be with you and deliver the keynote speech today. I'm incredibly flattered. I see some faces I know from the world of historic racing in the room. So flattered indeed that I think I remember when I agreed to give the keynote speech. Our email chain surreptitiously morphed from will you attend to will you speak to will you speak first, and so I thought I better write something to say. But I'm more than delighted to do so because I believe in absolutely everything this organisation stands for in dealing with everything that you deal with day to day and running your businesses in the world of either historic racing or the maintenance, supply, and indeed the assistance with ownership of historic cars. And ownership is so important indeed. The HCVA is a body which owns the problems that so many of you face day to day running your businesses. And I think that's why we're so grateful that a body like this exists. Ownership is critical to the way that historic motorsport specifically works. In almost no other form of motorsport is the car driven so much by the individual that owns it. In motorsport, we love smoke and mirrors. Everything exists and ceases to exist in contact with air. A sequence of arrive and drive programs, leased assets, clients that turn up for a weekend and then disappear momentarily afterwards really are the nature of how specifically modern sports car racing works. Not so in historic racing. It's different. The owner mostly drives the car. The owner fixes the car, worries about the car late on a Sunday afternoon, and thinks about that problem they had in 2019 at Alton Park, remembers the noise it made in 2020 at Silverstone and what they did to fix it. Absolutely everything about the nature of these historic racing cars is known and cared about by the owners in a way that simply is not true in the rest of racing, where the driver can pick up the car, race it for the weekend, and then hand it back to the racing team. Much as a dog starts to look like its owner over a number of years of ownership, a classic racing car starts to slowly embody its owner's priorities, built of 1,000 decisions made slowly over a number of race weekends to fix a number of problems that individual owner has had. They're slowly instilling themselves into every lap which is done in their historic racer. Take one look last weekend at the owner-driver race of the Win Percy Trophy in comparison to the invited driver race, and the difference between somebody who owns the car driving it and someone who's invited to drive the car is abundantly clear. I invite you to go back and watch those two races if there is any lack of clarity with regards to how that plays out. More now than ever, and as ever, the world of motorsport exemplifies the rest of the world as a little microcosm. As Steve McQueen famously said, racing is life. And indeed, what's going on in the world is mirrored in the world of motorsport, specifically for my generation, the millennials, who are struggling with a crisis of lack of ownership, and it's changing the way that they engage with their world, they engage with their community, and they engage with their passions. In a millennial world, your car is leased, your music is streamed, you live your life on a subscription model. The house millennials live in is rented. 30 years ago, the average age of house purchase was 29. Only around a quarter of people that age in 2026 will own the home they live in. Every major asset around normal people my age sits with a virtual ticking clock on top of it, ticking down to the moment they will no longer have access to it. The impermanence is continuous, and the impermanence is their reality. Millennials don't buy and sell. Millennials borrow and return, because the fiscal reality is that the bar for entry to ownership is so much bigger than it ever was. My role in the world of historic car racing is to try to communicate what it's like to race these cars to a new and a younger audience. And I start where they are, and I can tell you where they are. It's on Instagram all day long. Social media is a pretty awful place, really. It's intolerant, it's jealous. You pour in yourself and your data to a seemingly endless well for limited return. So why tolerate continuously handing your life and your data to these massive corporations in order for them to sell you things or sell it to others with seemingly no obvious payback? Could it be that for many youngsters, for the next 20 years at least, their Instagram feed is the only piece of real estate many of them will ever own? It's a place they can build. It's a place they can create. It's a place they can make to reflect who they are. Enter the historic car, which offer to our generation something which is increasingly rare. Something which is yours, something that you can improve, something that you can build into something that represents you without having to give up anything to the world of the social media giants. I spend a lot of time traveling around the country visiting historic workshops, some of them in conveniently business rate exempt farms where not a lot seems to be growing. Don't worry, I'm not going to tell anyone. But it's been certainly been a good year for twin cams at those particular farms. Some of them clearly in someone's garden shed, which has got badly out of hand and is now a Pan's labyrinth of bits of gearbox for a Hillman Imp. Some of them are on a Silverstone industrial estate, which says, yes, I could have been in the British Touring Car Championship, but I definitely prefer the company here. In every single one of those workshops, my favourite car is present. It's a tatty Formula Junior or a midget or an Escort or a Mini, primer on one wing, and it's the owner of that car which makes me excited. It's owned by the intern or the garage's youngest member. They're fixing it up out of hours, and they have the dream of racing it. When we build cars at Brundle Motorsport, we run time-lapse cameras to capture the endeavour of our builds. But what I capture is often something completely different. In the dark sections overnight, the telltale twinkle of light, the one door that's open that says the workshop's youngest member is putting an hour in on their own project before they begin work. This indeed is a ladder with a much lower buy-in. We spend a great deal of time wondering why young people disappear into strange, toxic corners of the World Wide Web. But it's hard to buy into a community when you live in something that isn't yours and you don't own anything to show for it. With great transience comes great irresponsibility. In the recent Louis Theroux documentary on the manosphere, young men are depicted desperately searching for their purpose and belonging, groping around in a world which is not offering them anything to demonstrate their abilities and their character. So classic cars to save the world then. Maybe that sounds a tiny little bit grandiose, I will admit, but they might save someone, and that's enough, isn't it? Park a modern hatchback next to a Ferrari SF90, and that's an inconvenience. Park a Rover Mini next to a short wheelbase Ferrari, and that's a conversation. The Rover Mini driver will engage immediately in a discussion with the Ferrari driver. Where do you get your engines from? Who supplies this part? Who supplies that part? And any young person in the classic car space's favourite line, I used to have one of those. The person you grab onto for dear life and desperately plumb for information about whatever it is you've got yourself into now. Historic cars carry that unique emotion that transcends being simply an asset and flattens status in a way that modern car culture often creates a Mount Everest in it. So access then to people and organizations and groups like this one around you that are going to allow these young people to generate contacts, to generate interest, to generate business, and to move forward maybe towards the life that they're being promised online, but in a way which builds and supports rather than a way which takes and exploits in the way they're being instructed that lifestyle is to be achieved. Understanding ownership in a classic car is a sandbox trial in a sense of ownership, perhaps in a community, perhaps in a business, or maybe even in a country. Patience when it breaks, understanding when it changes, and grit and determination to make sure you have the parts, equipment, and time needed to maintain your charge. Proof of concept, perhaps, for an improved society. So my call to action for you is this. By dint of being in this room, I can tell you that there will be an intern sitting somewhere on your email system, asking you if they can come down for a day, a week, or even two, sweep up and learn about your business and what you do. They've been trying to get a hold of you, and you've just been super, super busy. Maybe tomorrow is the day you email that intern back and see if they'd like to drop in for a day. There's probably a content creator who's been emailing you for a project that you don't really understand. They want to come down and understand your business. Maybe make some videos or some film about what it is you do. Maybe tomorrow is the day you give them a ring or get back to their email message. If we want a classic car industry to survive, we know we need young people in it. There's an aging population at every racetrack I go to where classic cars are present. But in a broader spectrum, it is in fact the young people that need you more than you need them. To give them focus, to give them interest, to give them the first rung on a ladder in which to build a more successful and more interesting life based around a passion for classic cars. Thank you very much. Am I doing some questions?
I think the question for me would be, how have you translated your skills learnt through professional motorsport into the historic vehicle world? Has any of them translated into that new world?
You need to learn to lose to start with, because the world of classic racing is very competitive. Yes, of course, there are transferable basic skills, but the thing that you need to take most the first time that you race a historic car is humility and understanding of how complex and difficult these cars are to drive, and a recognition, which I think very few of us have, of just how vast this industry is. The door opened a crack for me into the world of historic motorsport and historic cars. You walk through it, and there is a great world out there that you don't know exists. And that's when I made the decision that I was going to try using all of the platforms that I have available to me to cast that door open to others, and I've had great fun doing so.
And of course, it's very difficult to get into motorsport at all levels, whether you want to be a driver or whether you want to be on the spanners in the garages or an engineer. Is there an alternative to perhaps the mainstream motorsports that some young people ought to consider that perhaps historic motor racing is a viable career for them for the future?
Historic motorsport is an incredibly viable career because you rely so much on the experience of the driver, the understanding of the machinery. That all takes work in a professional way. And there are people in the world of historic motorsport who want to arrive, they want to drive. These young people can be of service to get everything ready to understand that they can apply themselves in order to be the service provider to those individuals. A really sad thing that I'm seeing at the moment is, particularly in historic racing circles, exclusion of younger individuals, particularly younger pros, by penalising them in the races in order to defend perhaps a incumbent audience. And I think that's really important not to do. If you want young people in historic car culture, if you like them in the historic car industry, you cannot exclude them from historic car racing, however inconveniently quick they are. That is a small part of the reality that opening the door to a young group in motorsport firstly and in classic cars secondly is a two-way street. They've got to play their part as well, of course.
So if you were to solve that problem, could we ever see, do you envisage a situation where, because I think most people view historic motorsport as the thing you do after you finish your professional career. Could we see that flip and see historic racing as being a gateway into a professional driving career?
I mean, the joy of historic cars is whilst, this stuff is bespoke and you need to do the legwork to build the car, actually, when you look at the complexity of the vehicles, it is 60s or 70s or 50s. And so, the cost of running modern racing and modern motorsport teams escalates to an almost ridiculous proportion. Where historic cars, the sort of continuous parity and the eligibility of historic cars prevent the cost from escalating. I mean, the costs escalate, but not as badly as they do in the modern world. So what I'm coming round to is, from a cost perspective, if looked at from by way of a ladder, it is the bottom rung. And I do know young drivers who've started in Formula Juniors, now drive in GT World Challenge, and they carry a unique perspective, having learned that when you move the gear lever, this rod touches that rod into the selector fork and so on, and are able to communicate with engineering staff and are able to look after cars, manage situations in a way which is maybe better than a driver who's come through the modern route. I think, though, the world of historic motorsport specifically is a free market, and it is a very open market, and long may that continue without it being too stratified, organized, because with all of those formulaic things, you bring in a sense of hierarchy, and then the cost comes with it.
Sure. And there may be some people listening to our conversation here thinking, well, how do I relate to historic motorsport at the levels of Goodwood and others when most of our work is within Morris Minors in the sheds you described? How do the two ecosystems talk to each other, do you think?
Well, I mean, the first thing to say is that, of course, all of the content that you see from Goodwood might be from, a 250 LM, but just after it, there's probably a Morris Minor racing. The reality is that some of the best historic racing that goes on is in some of the least powerful cars. And actually, grids are incredibly well served with an opportunity to race almost anything. These cars are from an era where you raced them on a Sunday and you bought them on a Monday. That era is very well over, unfortunately, and we need to find different ways to promote our motorsport. But the reality in the world of the classic car is, in fact, a passion for Goodwood-style racing in almost any model of vehicle is a marketing tool for you in a way that it is almost nowhere else in the automotive industry. The concept that someone might buy a D-Type for the road, having watched a D-Type race at Le Mans Classic, is
extremely plausible. The concept that someone might specifically buy a Mercedes C-Class because they feel it relates to the Mercedes Formula One car is present, but a bit of a bigger jump. So that's the reality.
I think that's it. We have to sell the classic car experience almost like the original manufacturers sold them as models in showrooms, and that's the challenge we need to face. I do mention that about the Goodwood members meeting, some of the TV coverage of the members parade. There were some really expensive cars out on track, but the cameras focused on the MG Montego, which I loved.
And that's the reality to which I speak as well. You know, the flattening of the curve, because however humble you think your car is, there'll be somebody parked next to you in something maybe less humble that remembers one, loves it, wants to talk to you about it, and that opens doors.
Ladies and gentlemen, Alex Brundle.